Hello, good to see you again. Welcome to Block 4, Operations and Equations with Directed Number, Lesson 5. I'll share my screen. So, in your previous lesson, you learned how to add directed numbers. So, directed numbers are also known as positive and negative integers. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to subtract directed numbers. So, before we start, I would like you to pause the video and, um, click on the like button on our videos, subscribe to the channel, share the video to those you think can benefit from the video, and click on the notification bell so that whenever new videos are released, you'll be notified. Thank you. Before we start, I would like you to answer the retrieval practice questions in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the retrieval practice questions, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So for the first one, you will ask, what is the total value of the counters above? Well, remember, when working with counters, we learned about zero pairs. So you can see here that we have these pairs as zero pairs. So they're essentially zero, which means that our answer should be -5. Next, you ask, what is the total value if three negative counters are removed? So if we remove three negative counters like this, our answer will be -2. Okay. Next, we're asked work out the missing number in the part whole model. Now, why is it -9? If you think about it using your number line, here, the part whole model, even though it's turned on the side, remember the part whole model, these two circles will add up to give you what is on the top of the tree or the part whole model. So if you think about it, we're being asked, what do we have to add to -3 to get -12? Well, another way of thinking about it is, how many jumps would you have to make to get to -12? Well, to get to -12, you're going to have to make 9 jumps or 9 steps to the left of your number line, which means it's going to be -9. Remember, if you're making steps to the left of your number line, it's -9. So your answer will be -12. All right, let's do some new learning. If we have, so we're going to be using yellow as our positive and red as our negative counter. So if we're asked to use counters to do this calculation, -5 subtracts -3. How do we do this? Of course, using counters, we'll have -5 counters. And then we want to subtract 3 negative counters. So we'll be left with 2 negative counters. So our answer is -2. Let's look at another example. If we have -2 counters and we're asked to subtract -3 counters, we do not have enough -3 counters to subtract the 3 negative counters. So we're going to use what we call zero pairs to represent nothing. But those zero pairs will have 3 negative counters, which we need. So if we have zero pairs, another zero pair, okay, if we have zero pair, we now have 3 negative counters. Okay, so if we have zero pair, we now have 3 negative counters. Adding the zero pair has not changed anything. we still have actually two negative counters because -1 add 1 is 0. So it has not really changed what we had before. But what it has done, it has made us have 3 negative counters. So now if we take 3 negative counters away, our answer is +1. Next, if we have 5 counters and we're asked to subtract 3 negative counters, because that's what that calculation is, what we have is this. But I want you to think, how would we represent 0 pairs such that we can have 3 negative counters that we can take away? That's right. Some of you would have identified that we need 3 0 pairs. Okay? So having these 3 0 pairs means that we can now subtract 3 negative counters. So when they're gone, we're now left with 8 negative counters. Now, there is something I want to show you, which we will discuss in our subsequent slides or learning as we move along in this lesson. I want you to know that 2 negatives seated next to each other is positive. So remember, there was a lesson where you learned that a negative and a positive next to each other is actually a negative. And a positive, sorry, let's, and a negative next to a positive is negative. Now, something new you have learned is a negative and a negative next to each other will result in a positive. So if we had used this method, which we will do in the next stage of our lesson, this would become 5 add 3, which is 8. So using this method, which is quicker, and the counter method means that we get the same answer. All right, it's now time for you to pause the video and answer questions 1 to 6 answer questions 1 to 2 in 4 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 1 and 2, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So here you will simply ask, what is the total value when one counter is removed from each set? Okay, so you simply just ask to write the total value when one counter is removed from each set. Okay, and you can see here that this is how the calculation is represented. -4 subtract -1. That's how it is when you represent it as counters, but here is the mathematical way of writing it. This one is -7 subtract -1, and so on and so forth. And then here you ask question 2, complete the calculations, use counters to help you. So using what we've learned just now, what I told you, these 2 negatives will be positive. So that it's the same thing as saying -5 add 1, which would be -4. All right. This one is the same thing as saying -5 add 2. So because these 2 negatives will become positive, so that will be -5 add 2. Yeah. So which is -3. All right, let's move on. Pause the video and answer questions 3 and 4 in 2 minutes. All right, assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 3 and 4, here are the answers. So here you were asked, what is the total value of the set of counters? It's 0. They are all 0 pairs, okay? +1 will cancel out, -1, +1 will cancel out. So -1 plus 1 is 0. -1 plus 1 is 0, yeah? All right, here, what is the total value of each set of counters? So here is 3, here That one will be 0 pair, and that will be 3. We have 2 0 pairs, so our result will be 3. So these will cancel each other out. Next, you asked, just a minute. Next, you ask, take the set of counters that will help you to work out the answer to 3 subtract negative 2, right? Now, there are two negative counters to take away, all right? So the calculation that will make that possible will be this one. So 3, so imagine we had 3 counters before, but they ask us to subtract 2 negative counters. We're going to have to use 0 pairs, 2 of them, so that we have 2 negative counters that we can subtract, which will give us, this calculation here. So our result will be 5. And you can see if we do that, our result will be 5. Pause the video and answer questions 5 and 6 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 5 and 6, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So here, you're asked to complete the calculations, these calculations. Now, remember what we have learned, or what I showed you at the start of the lesson, or in our example during the lesson. These two will become positive. These two will become positive. So that's like saying 3 plus 1, 3 plus 3. These two negatives will become positive next to each other. So 3 plus 4 is 7. Next, these calculations, you should be able to do them really quickly. Okay, so complete the sequence of subtractions. All right, these two will become positive. These ones, you could do them mentally using your number line. Okay, and then so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay, if we have calculations like this, remember that we cannot always use counters. Sometimes we could have really large numbers. Okay, so I want you to pause the video and answer these questions really quick to practice what you've learned so far about two negatives being next to each other. All right, assuming you've paused the video and you've answered them, here are the answers. Okay. And I'm sure you've noticed that two negatives next to each other result in positive. And that's the calculation. Now, why this is useful is that we can begin to use this method to do some really interesting calculations when it involves large numbers. So imagine if you were asked to do this calculation, 413 subtract negative 64, you're not going to use counters to do this, will you? That is why having this knowledge that the two negatives next to each other is actually positive will help you rewrite the calculation as 413 at 64. All right, here is a mistake that Annie made. Annie says that negative 7 subtract 8, because that's what it is equal to 15. What mistake has Annie made? Well, Annie has made the mistake that two negatives make a positive, probably, right? But what Annie has forgotten is this is what two negatives mean to be positive. They must be next to each other. So the way Annie should have done this calculation is to start at negative 7. To subtract 8 means she should do 8 steps to the left of her number line, which will result in negative 15. Okay? Here is our final example for the lesson. The table shows the temperatures in several cities. What is the range of the temperature? Now remember, to calculate range, you subtract the smallest number from the biggest number. So the biggest one is 24, and we want to subtract negative 7 from 24. Now remember, those two negatives will be positive. So this is the same thing as doing 24, add 7, which is 31. So the range of the temperatures is 31 degrees Celsius. All right, it's now time for you to practice. Pause the video and answer questions 7 and 8 in 4 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 7 and 8, here are the answers. So here, what mistake do you think Brett has made? So Brett would have thought that, so he has seen two negatives and wrongly think that they will result in positive. Remember what we've learned? The two negatives must be next to each other. Okay? Work out the calculations. So with these calculations, you could either use your number line. For some of them, you could use your knowledge of knowing that two negatives next to each other will give you positive. Okay? Pause the video and answer questions 9 and 10 in 4 minutes. All right. Assuming you've paused the video, here are the answers. So for this one, you're being asked that 8 subtract a number gives you negative 11. Now, one way to do this is to do the inverse operation. All right. So if you're thinking, okay, what do I have to subtract to give me 11? Now, the inverse operation, if you think about it, there are different ways to do this, but the first method is to say, okay, what if I do the inverse so that I can find, okay, what should be here? Now, the inverse would be to add 11 to 8. All right. Another way of thinking about it is, well, you want to subtract a number from 8 such that you're going to get 11, negative 11. So you're going to have to cross 0 to get to negative 11. Now, if you think about it, if you're crossing 0 to get to negative 11, it means from 8 to 0, you already have 8. Now, from 0 to 11 to negative 11, you have another 11 steps. So that means 19. Yeah. And then you can use the same operation here. So here, negative 8, subtract 3. Okay, they're asking us, what do we have to subtract from negative 8 to get negative 11? Now, if you think about it, you're on negative 8. Now, to get to negative 11, you're going to have to think that, okay, I'm going to be going further down the left. Now, how many steps do I have to do to get to negative 11? That has to be 3. So you're subtracting 3. Here, they're asking us 8, we subtract something, and that gives us 5. Now, if you think about it, you're on position number 8 on the number line, but you're going to land, or if you did the steps, you're going to land on 5. So how many steps would you have to do to get from 8 to 5? Is 3, so you're subtracting 3. So you're going to have to do 3 steps. Remember, the further right you are on the number line, the greater the number. So if from 8, your result is 5, it means you must have moved to the left, which decreases your number. Here you have negative 8, and then your result then becomes 5. So it means if from negative 8, you're subtracting something that then gives you a positive 5, it means that this is going to have to be a negative. Why? Now, thinking about it, to get from negative 8 to positive 5, you're going to have to cross 0. So remember, going from -8 all the way to +5, you're going to the right of your number line. So you have to have a positive, you're making positive steps. So if you think about it, if you're subtracting something that would then result in a positive, then that has to be a negative, because remember, two negatives will give you positive. Okay? So that's why that has to be a -13 in that box. This one is the same process we use for these ones. So 11, 8 subtract something should give us 11. Now we know that to get from 8 to 11, and then we're subtracting something, we're definitely adding something to 8, which is 3, to get 11. So it has to be a negative in that box, because two negatives will become positive. Here, -8 subtract something, we don't know what it is, gives us 11. Now, that should make us realize that, okay, if I have -8, and then when I finish subtracting something that I don't know, I end up with a positive number, that number is going to have to be a positive. So it has to be positive for it to result to a positive number. Now, thinking about it is going to have to be a -19, all right? Because these two will become positive. Another way to think about it is to do inverse operation, all right? So if you do inverse operation, it means that this, if this moves over here, it's going to become a positive. So doing your inverse operation, it will be on this side, it will be 11 add 8, which is 19. Okay? But we have negative here. So it has to be -19, right? Now, looking at this one, we can do it the same way. We'll say, okay, 8 subtract a number will give us -5. Now, we had positive number, so we have to think, okay, what could that number be? If we do an inverse operation, it will be 8 add 5. Or if we think about it, to get from 8, which is a positive number, to -5, we have to cross 0. Now, 8 going to the left, okay? So to get from 8 to -5, we have to go to the left. We have to cross 0. So it means we have done 8 steps to the left. So that's -8. All right. And then we do another 5 steps to get to 13. So for us to be able to get to -5. All right. So it should be 13. Then here we have -8. We have to subtract something to give us -5. Now, if we have -8 and then we have to subtract something to get -5, it means that number is not so big anyway. So it has to be a positive for us to still be at -5. And that will be doing positive 3 steps forward. That has to be negative because these two will be positive. So it's the same thing as saying -8 add 3. All right, these are the answers for these ones. So mark your work quickly. I don't want the video to be too long. Pause the video and answer questions 11 and 12 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, here are the answers. So mark your work and celebrate your success. So here you were asked to find pairs of numbers to complete these statements. So remember, you can have more than one answer. So these two will be 8 plus 9, which is 17. So that should be 20 minus 3. These two will be positive. Yeah. So negative 8 add 9 will be positive 1. So it has to be 4 minus 3. Here, we're looking for numbers that will make them equal. Okay. So that should be a positive. 2 negatives will be positive. So it means something, add that, and these two, yeah. So you can have more than one number, and these two will be positive. So negative 9 add 9 is 0, negative 8 add 8 is 0. And then here you were asked to work out the range of the temperature. Let's move this out of the way. All right, you say the record, so what is the range of the temperature? The lowest temperature is negative 6, and the highest is 2. So the range will be 2 minus 6. So 2 subtract negative 6. These two will be positive. So that will be 2 add 6, which is 8 degrees Celsius. And that brings us to the end of our lesson. So what have we learned so far? So in this lesson, we have learned how to subtract negative and positive numbers, or positive and negative numbers. So we've learned how to subtract directed numbers. And something really important you need to know is that when we say two negatives become positive, it is only when they are next to each other. Well done for sticking around and for learning to master directed numbers, or positive and negative integers. Until next time, take really good care of yourself, and bye-bye.